So good afternoon, everyone, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are in the world at this time. I want to welcome you to today's Civic Scientist webinar, which is organized by the Science and Technology program here at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy in Houston, Texas. I really do have a great pleasure today to be hosting today's Civic Scientist lecture titled Diversity in Science and Engineering. I'm going to be joined by two colleagues whom I've had the great privilege to work with and to have admired for many, many decades, Dr. Shirley Malcom, Dr. Richard Tapia, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. Through our civic scientist activities at the Baker Institute, we're seeking to stimulate a dialogue, a conversation, if you like, between scientists and the larger public and policymakers, talking about the vital link between science and technology in the everyday lives of all of us, and to bridge what we feel is a dangerous divide that exists between science and rational public policy making. Our program sponsors events such as the Civic Scientist Lecture Series, one of which we have today, our outreach activities in local schools, which we hope to broaden to other parts of the country, a leadership program for science, engineering, and mathematics graduate students, and policy research and dissemination. Again, with the goal of ensuring that evidence-based scientific advice is given greater weight in policy decisions made by elected officials and other policymakers. Our lecture series features prominent scientists, engineers, and mathematicians, role models who have made significant contributions to advancing science and technology while devoting a portion of their careers to public service and engagement. The Civic Scientist program, of course, would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. The program has received enthusiastic support from Rice University's George R. Brown School of Engineering and the Weiss School of Natural Sciences. And we would like to give a special thanks to our Houston business leaders, Benjamin and Winifred Cheng, for their continued generous support of the Civic Scientist program, as well as to the Kavli Foundation and the National Science Foundation, which provided grant support for this event, as well as other outreach activities over the coming year. Today's topic, diversity in science and engineering, is one in which I really can't imagine two more appropriate civic scientist role models than our guest speakers, Dr. Shirley Malcom and Dr. Richard Tapia. So first, Shirley Malcom, who will lead off our discussion. Shirley is the Senior Advisor at the American Association for the Advancement of Science and Director of the SEA Change, where SEA stands for STEM, Equity, Achievement. She is an honorary trustee of the American Museum of Natural History, a regent of Morgan State University, and a trustee of Caltech. Shirley has chaired a very large number of national committees addressing education reform and access to STEM, science, engineering, technology, mathematics, and medicine, in education, in career paths, and public literacy. She served both on the National Science Foundation's National Science Board and the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology during the Clinton administration. In 2003, Shirley received the Public Welfare Medal of the National Academy of Sciences, the highest award bestowed by the Academy. Shirley Malcom was born in Birmingham, Alabama. She earned a bachelor's degree with distinction in zoology from the University of Washington, master's degree in zoology from UCLA, and a doctorate in ecology from the Pennsylvania State University. Shirley will be followed by our second guest, Richard Tapia. Richard is professor of computational and applied mathematics and director of the Tapia Center for Excellence and Equity at Rice University. He also holds the rank of university professor, Rice's highest academic title, awarded to only 7 individuals in the university's history. Among his numerous other honors, and the list is long, there are the National Science Board's Vannevar Bush Award and election to the National Academy of Engineering, first Hispanic to receive these honors. In 2011, Richard was awarded the National Medal of Science, highest honor bestowed by the United States government on scientists and engineers. Richard has also served on the National Science Foundation's National Science Board. Indeed, Richard and Shirley served at the same time, and they could tell you stories about that period. Richard Tapia was born in Los Angeles, California, to parents who immigrated from Mexico. He holds 3 degrees: bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in mathematics from UCLA. Now, this afternoon, Doctors Malcom and Tapia, reflecting on their own careers and lifetime achievement and involvement, will be discussing the chronic lack of women and minority representation in science and engineering, indeed, all STEM fields, why this continues to be such a vitally important matter for the nation and its science and technology enterprise, and perhaps suggest ways to make progress. Each speaker will give brief remarks, followed by moderated question and answers. So all of you who are tuning in, please submit your questions through the question box on your screen, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So now I'll turn it over to Shirley Malcom for her remarks. Shirley, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Uh, it's a real pleasure for me to be able to join in this afternoon's, morning, or evening's presentation, and especially to be able to join with Richard Tapia. As Neil indicated, Richard and I served together on the National Science Board. And as I guess John Lewis would say, were he here to listen to this, we managed to make good trouble. Um, as Neil indicated, I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. And I am old enough that being black in Birmingham means that I lived in segregated neighborhoods, that I attended segregated schools, and I was only taught by black teachers. I only have ever gone, had that point, had only ever gone to school, attended school with other black children. And so the perspective that I provide is really, I think, um, a different one because of the way that I experience science um, within my within my life and within my growing up. Birmingham was a city that was built on steel and iron. It was heavily industrialized. People moved to Birmingham from other places at the end of the 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s to take advantage of the uh, the the jobs that were there at the time. And
Shirley, some of us are not hearing you. Could you check your mic, please?
Okay.
Yes, there
Is
you
that
are.
better
Thank
now?
you. Thank you.
Is
Yes,
that better now?
uh, I
Okay.
I can hear you. Please go back.
Okay.
I don't want to lose any of your presentation, so
Okay. All
go
right.
back
I
to
will go
slide
all the
one.
way back.
Thank you. Yes,
Okay. I'm sorry about that. I don't know how that happened.
it's a
Um,
thank you.
okay. I was born and raised in Birmingham, as Neil said, and that meant that I was living in an environment where, as a black person, I only lived in a neighborhood, and I that was all black. I went to schools that were all black. My teachers were all black, and that the kind of environment that we have was shaped totally by living in the Jim Crow South. Birmingham was a steel town. It was a town that was built on heavy industry. It was a town that was, because of that, it had dirty air. And my grandmother always complained when the air got really bad about how the pollution actually ended up putting a lot of soot on her sheets that she had tried to hang out in the yard and to dry. But this whole question of where we lived and how we lived there in Jones Valley, surrounded by industry, is something that I think of often in terms of shaping the way that I think about the kind of environmental challenges that we face within many of our urban centers. I grew up in a multi generational household. My grandmother, Bessie Estelle Funderburg, was born in 1886. She was born in Talladega County. Her mother was actually born into slavery. And so being able to understand where my grandmother was coming from, what she had been going through, and it provided a kind of a context to my life. My grandmother voted for the first time when she was 70 years old. There were literacy tests and poll taxes that um, suppressed the numbers of blacks who could vote. Uh, I learned that you can't judge a person by the amount of formal education that they have. Mom had only gone through the eighth grade, and yet she was very, very smart. And so the in terms of sharing my science or my love for science with her, this was an issue of my having to figure out how do I find this intersection, because I knew that if I explained it to her at a level that she could understand, that in fact that she would support what it was that I was trying to do. This was the 1950s when um, two movements basically collided that have shaped the rest of my life. One, the movement for civil rights, and the other, the when Sputnik was launched by the then Soviet Union. The launch of Sputnik changed forever the way that I was educated in terms of actually introducing science instruction, regular science instruction into my life. It caused me to think about going into science. I was good at science and math. I was interested in it. But we had another movement that was underway at the time, and that's the civil rights movement. The picture that you see there is one of Bethel Baptist Church. This was the church where my mother and grandmother attended, and the wreck of the parsonage next to it. This was caused by a bomb blast on Christmas night, 1956. And this bomb blast really, I think, helped us realize how very vulnerable we all were and how fragile our lives were as Black people living in Birmingham. This is a picture from the next morning after the blast. That's my grandmother there, hugging Reverend Shuttlesworth when she so happy that in fact that he had managed to survive the blast. And right there on the other corner, that's me, a 10-year-old who had grown up with these kinds of challenges and therefore had a real understanding of the kinds of civil rights that we were trying to pursue. Uh, I started off at Hudson School, and Hudson School today, I wanted to try to find you a picture, but Hudson School today is in fact a Superfund site. Um, that all of that pollution that has managed somehow to accumulate. In the sixth grade, I switched to Lewis School, and that's where I had my first real science instruction. This is my high school, Carver High School, George Washington Carver High School, which is also the site, a Superfund site. I wonder now what I was experiencing during all that time. And this is my year that I graduated in 1963, graduated from high school, where, as I say here, there was the Children's March, no prom, martial law, and real chaos in terms of trying to figure out how we were going to eventually gain the freedoms that we all longed for and knew that we deserved. I went to the University of Washington, which was a total culture shock because I had only gone to school with all black students, and the University of Washington, I almost always was the only black in my class. The other issue was that I was often the only woman in my science classes. And so I began to understand that there was something that was a little bit strange here that I had not anticipated. When I was in high school, the girls were as likely to take science and math as the boys were. But I discovered all of my deficiencies, all the deficits that I had from going to the schools where I went. George Washington Carver was a wonderful place for a high school, but it also had many deficiencies in that we did not have the kinds of laboratory and equipment that was present in the schools that were segregated for white students. So there was lots of adjustments to be made as the sometimes the only woman, almost always the only blacks, um, encountering low expectations, encountering student comments, almost failing chemistry lab. Remember, I said that we didn't have the kind of laboratories there. Um, but I made it through with thanks to caring faculty who, in fact, were willing to give me a chance to prove that, in fact, I wasn't dumb, that was might have been underprepared. I was a pre-med major when I went there, but in fact, I made a switch from pre-med to graduate education, and I had a lot of catching up to do. I had not been prepared to go into graduate school. In fact, no one had ever looked like me that I had ever encountered in my whole time at the University of Washington who was a faculty member. So I came late to graduate education. But I managed to get through. That's me with my parents. They were happy. I was happier because I had, in fact, managed to survive. Um, Not just survive, but in many ways to thrive, to be able to find my niche and find out that I could belong in science. But it left me with a real question in my mind always, and that is, what are the forces that shape STEM? What happened to the women? Why weren't they there? Why weren't other black students there? If you see the graph that I present here, it starts at 1965. I was in college at that time. And yes, there weren't that many women in medical school. There weren't that many women in law school or in the physical sciences. And then we see a steady climb over the years that as more and more women went in, as the laws changed, that the shape of STEM changed as well. But we see too that red line, which is computer science, where women went up in 85 to the highest part, and then they started to come down. And they have continued to be down. And so trying to understand these patterns so that if that can affect it, that has been a large part of my civic life, as my life as a civic scientist, and trying to understand how we can get to a point where we use the talent that is out there and available. The population that we have does not look like the population of the science and engineering workforce. Why is that the case? And how can we change it? And that is bringing you up to the moment. And I hope that we will be able to talk about the ways that I now understand, having for decades now been trying to impact that I now understand what we must do in order to make.
Shirley, thank you so much for that presentation. Your story is life story. It's fascinating and it's inspiring, and I think certainly hope would give confidence to young women and men, whatever their backgrounds, that they can realize their dreams as well. Many things have changed over the years, but some of the fundamentals have not, and we'll get a chance to talk about that in just a minute. So next, Richard Tapia will give us his perspective on diversity in science and engineering. And so, Richard, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so this is the Civic Scientist lecture series. I'm very proud to be here, especially with such close friends. Okay, if I had to entitle my life, it would be one sentence that says, "My unlikely journey from the barrios of Los Angeles to the White House and the National Medal of Science." That's a long trip, a really long trip. But anyway, it is the story of my life. Now, first I start with my background, okay? As Shirley alluded to, I'd like to atone for my sins, okay? In 1996, President Clinton appointed me to the National Science Board, okay? When I got there, I ran into some sort of, let's say, some bad characters, okay? And this was in the way of Shirley Malcom. She and I just really grooved and got together. Shirley taught me a lot. One of the things that Shirley taught me was how to disagree professionally with your colleagues. Today in my departments at Rice, some of my colleagues haven't learned that. Shirley taught me how to disagree professionally, okay? And that was really an important issue. She also taught me how to be defensive. For example, Shirley would come to me and say, Richard, you should be on that committee and try to chair it. And I said, but Shirley, I don't want to be on that committee. But look, Richard, if you're not on that committee, look who's going to be on it and who's going to chair it. You have to do it for a defensive move, okay? And so I said, okay. And there were a couple of very important committees that I got on because Shirley had said, look, we need you representing our side. So that was good. They were great years, 6 years in there. And at one time, Neil Lane came up to me and he said, Richard, you really make my life difficult. And I said, but Neil, that's why I'm here. I'm supposed to do that, okay? And then I said, well, you know, and Shirley makes it easy for me because we're together really good doing, you know, a lot of good things. So atoning for my sins at my age right now, Neil, I'm sorry if I made your life difficult, but I think it was for the good, okay? Origins, my parents are from Mexico. I was born in Los Angeles, okay? My education, really a very weak high school, weak community college. So high school, yes, I was the best math student in high school, but I was a big fish in a little tiny pond. Then nobody in high school told me to go to college. I mean, I didn't have teachers say, you're really good, you should go. So I accidentally ended up in community college, and there was not a very good community college. But one professor said, go to UCLA. You have talent, go to UCLA. And I did. But at UCLA, I was always playing catch up. I was behind from high school. I was behind from community college. So my whole life at UCLA was catch up with the rest of the people who were so well prepared. That was very, very important to me. And it was also very challenging. Okay. Professional challenges for me. Okay. I knew in my dreams, even though my parents were not educated, in fact, my mother never even went to high school, I knew that I wanted to become a mathematician, a scientist. So my professional challenge was becoming a recognized scientist. I knew at a certain point in my life that I wanted to be civic. Now, civic to me was my commitment to improving representation. When I was a graduate student at UCLA, there were about 300 math students in the math department. There was one Black and there was one Hispanic, and that was me. And the qualifying exams got rid of the Black. So I went through as the only underrepresented minority in the entire department, okay? Now, my whole life has been a delicate balance, an incredibly. So these three little words that say a delicate balance, they're just so small, but this has been an incredibly big thing in my life. It's been huge, okay? Every day of my life, I had a deal. The danger of becoming civic too soon and not achieving respected science status. I want to be a scientist, but I want to reach out. I want to be civic and I want to be a scientist. That was no small matter. It was an incredibly delicate balance. And I would say, my colleagues would tell me, look, you're good as a mathematician. Why are you spending your time on this outreach? And I said, I have to. Now, in 2011, as Neil mentioned, the delicate balance was a success because I won the National Medal of Science. And President Obama said, there are 7 of you winning this award, and all of you have done great research. But Richard Tapia has given to the country in critical ways, improving representation for women and minorities. So he purposely, he just singled me out and said to everybody, he has done more. And I wish the rest of you would emulate what he has done. Okay, so the danger of having underrepresentation. Now, the United States population is 13% Black, and it's not increasing. It's 18% Hispanic, and it is increasing for a total of 41%. 41% is a big number. 41%, is a big part of our population. The United States cannot maintain its economic and scientific health when such a large part of its population is left out of the country's mainstream activity of science and engineering. This means both Black and Hispanic. You can't fix it with one and not the other because the country will still be in danger. STEM underrepresentation endangers the health of the nation, not the health of the respective disciplines. I argue, and a lot of people like to disagree with me on this, but I argue that mathematics will remain healthy without the participation of women and underrepresented minorities, but not the country. Not the country. The country will not remain healthy. So underrepresentation endangers the health of the nation. The United States STEM faculty representation, and I like to point to AAU Tier 1 universities because they're the ones that lead the country in so much. If you look at the faculty or the graduate student population, it doesn't matter, at these AAU Tier 1 universities, less than 2% Black. This is STEM faculty, less than 2% Hispanic, is greater than 25% Asian, and I credit them for that. To me, I say congratulations, and I compliment them for what they've done. But I like to say this little statement, and it's very simple. It says, we, the underrepresented minorities, are here, but we're not there. We're here in the country, but we're not there on the faculties. Okay. Now, let's talk about underrepresented, the failures of underrepresented that lead to underrepresentation, okay? The underrepresented minority's worst enemy is poor preparation at all levels. That's number one. The underrepresented minority's worst enemy is poor preparation at all levels. The second worst enemy at all is at elite Tier 1 universities like AAU Tier 1 schools. The math faculty and other STEM faculty, they do not differentiate between poor talent and poor preparation. Shirley alluded to this, okay? And that certainly happened in my case. So we need support programs like the Triesman Emerging Scholars Program built by Yuri Triesman. At Rice, we have RESP, Rice and Emerging Scholars Program, led by Mike Wolf, and he's done a great job with that program. But mathematicians come and they say, you are not doing well, you don't have the talent, you should go away, whatever that means, okay? So we end up with excessive student migration away from STEM and towards a friendlier side of campus. The friendlier side of campus is sociology, political science. How many Rice students have I caught before or have talked after? They say, STEM was not for me. Even though they will admit in the middle of their heart they love STEM, but these good universities have taken it out of them. In faculty hiring, there's an excessive emphasis is placed on number of published papers. Sometimes you just have a linear ordering. How many papers did you write? Or pedigree of degree granting institution. If you end up with 15 papers out of Princeton, you've got a job. Doesn't matter who you are, whatever. Too much emphasis on number of published papers. Don't look at, so it's a multidimensional criteria should be used. But here we're using one criterion and the institution. Too much for Berkeley, Stanford, and especially with today's job market, okay? Now, we don't make a distinction between domestic and non-domestic minority hires, okay? Now, I'm not opposed to non-domestics, they hiring people as we talk about Hispanic, who come from Colombia or Argentina or whatever. They're great, and they give us a lot. But we're ignoring the domestic underrepresented minority, those that were raised in this country. So we want to fix something that is bad in this country and fix it because that's the health of the nation, okay? So as we bring in foreign faculty, we don't have domestic role models, domestic minority role models, people who said, yes, I grew up like that. I went through those challenges. Yes, I can tell you what it was like to grow up in Los Angeles. I can tell you what it was like to be the only minority student in mathematics at UCLA. Those are critical things. Not only can I tell you, it's so ingrained in my brain that I'm going to tell you whether I want to or whether you want to hear it. Okay. Now, many underrepresented minorities subscribe to the flawed, separate but equal doctrine. Okay. And in this country that we have this Hispanic serving institutions and historically Black colleges and universities, okay? Now, underrepresented minorities are relegated to the minor leagues just from the start. So you talk about leveling the playing field, and yet you put them in the minor leagues. For example, the California State University system, that's where the minorities in California are said to in a large numbers, and not the University of California system. Now, within the University of California system, they're relegated to UC Riverside and UC Merced. The only UC campuses that are not AAU tier universities, they're not relegated. In fact, there's an article in the Los Angeles paper about how many Hispanics were in the UC system, but they weren't at UCLA and they weren't at Berkeley. They were at Merced and they were at Riverside, okay? So they were really being deceptive, okay? The Texas top 10% rule. Texas A&M is 3% Black and UT Austin is 4% Black. Now both are 23% Hispanic. So this is something that I find very discouraging and very sad. The top Blacks in Texas, okay, that means the top 10% of the Blacks in Texas, avoid the two public flagships, A&M and UT Austin. So we opened the doors. We fought very hard to open the doors for the Blacks to go to two of the finest institutions in the country. And they go around the side. They don't go through the door. So the Blacks do not go out of the 10% rule to UT Austin or to Texas A&M. Where do the Blacks in Texas go? They go to HBCU's Prairie View and Texas Southern, okay? Now, we cannot have racial justice without educational justice. And we cannot have educational justice without educational integration. We have to have representation. We have to have it at Rice. We have to have it at Stanford. We have to have it at all these good schools. We can't not be there and expect to have racial and educational justice. Separate but equal is a flawed doctrine. No, I don't want that. Okay, so that's my little story. I've been working in these areas a lot. And if I wanted to say anything.
Thank you very much, Richard. So let me ask all our speakers, turn the cameras on now and mics, and we'll try to take some of these questions. So let's get the cameras on, please, and then I'll ask you a question or two. I see me, but I don't see you. There's Richard. Shirley, can you turn your camera on, please? Let me, while Shirley's doing this, let me start with a question. It'll be for both of you, but to Richard, maybe you could start with it. We use the word diversity in the title of today's presentations. It's a very general term. And in recent years, it seems to have replaced the idea of quotas in efforts by colleges, universities, and other institutions to address underrepresentation. Is diversity a better argument? Are all kinds of diversity important, equally important? Is there a better approach to making some progress in including more Americans in STEM fields and in higher education? So, Richard, what would you say?
I would say that, yes, Neil, it's important to include all kinds of different people, but it's intentional. It's not an accident that diversity has replaced, say, underrepresentation. That's by the courts, and that's by the designs and all these lawsuits that have happened. So yes, I don't use the word, I try not to use the word diversity. I want to use underrepresented minorities, okay? Because that's the problem. So diversity, as you point out, could be just a bunch of people from different countries. And I think that the use of diversity has really hurt us with respect to the movement of improving representation. I don't like to use that word. I do use it. I try not to use it. So the broad diversity is good, but it shouldn't replace the critical problem that we have, and that is the incredible underrepresentation of certain groups, and that's Hispanics and Blacks. So I balk at it. But anyway, yes, it's good to do this. I like that. I feel good when I look at a class, as I'm teaching a class, and I see all kinds of different people. That's good. But I feel it bothers me when I see diversity used instead of underrepresentation, and that was by design. That was by design.
Okay? Thank you.
I'm having
Shirley, are you on?
I'm having problem with my camera. I turn on the mic and camera, and I'm having problems. But my mic is on.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay, Richard is right that diversity is a much bigger term. It is a much more inclusive term, but it's not a term that specifically nails down where the problems are. The problems are with bringing in women in places where they're not, and bringing in blacks and black and brown people and indigenous people in places where they're not. I think that there's a lot more comfort with the idea of diversity than there is with the idea of really racially, ethnically, and gender inclusion. And that's really what we've got to work for.
Well, I appreciate both your comments. I, of course, agree that that's a larger challenge. But you point out, Shirley, that the word diversity is more comfortable to many people who don't like the idea of quotas and in particular focus on inclusion and exclusion. But there is an argument that diversity of different ethnic groups and people of color and people of different backgrounds actually does contribute to the advancement of science and technology and any other decision-making process in American democracy.
Right. You're absolutely right.
And so what I find, and I'm just speaking personally now, is the story gets complicated. I mean, there are many facets to these issues that have to do with diversity and underrepresentation, justice, equality. I'm just wondering if we've got the messaging ideally put together so that, in fact, we can then make these systemic changes that are clearly in the way of progress. Any comment on that comment? And then I'll move to another question.
Yeah, I want to say, Neil, you keep saying quotas. And no, diversity is used to replace affirmative action. Affirmative action came, and quotas went out a long time ago, and everybody accepted that. But affirmative action, was on the boundary of was it good, was it bad? And essentially, diversity has come in to replace affirmative action. Okay. Now, sure, of course, the general having people from all areas is of value, but there's a critical problem in the country. When we're 41% of the population, less than 2% of the population is faculty in AAU Tier 1 universities, we're really underrepresented. And as Shirley pointed out in computer science, the women were going up and now they're going down. So representation today is not better than it used to be. The job market is so tough. And so I think in 1972, we had more minority PhDs in mathematics than we have today. So we're not attacking the problem.
Shirley, you have an additional comment?
No, I mean,
Let me ask you, Shirley. I mean, you're director of a new AAAS initiative called SEA. Can you tell us a little bit about, is that an effort to try to make the systemic change that we're having so much difficulty doing?
Yes, it is. We have a situation where our institutions were not, they were not created by us, for us, to serve us. There are lots of policies, practices, processes that are in place that do not support us. And so the question is, the institutions just need to be changed, period. Not for one group or for another group. The problems are systemic. They're baked into the way the organizations run. And that's the reason that we've gone after a totally new strategy, and that's transformation. And that's what STEM, equity achievement, or sea change, is really all about. And that is to begin to look at institutions in very different ways, so that the ways that they operate in STEM begins to serve everyone, but taking into account those who are least well served as you are doing that transformation.
Mm-hmm. Let me thank you for that. I mean, let me be provocative here, since we're all good friends and we have lots of people thinking thoughts. There are a lot of white people, and of course we haven't talked at all about Native Americans, a smaller population, but definitely underrepresented. But there are a lot of poor white people that don't have a chance. They really don't have a chance. We're seeing that emerge, of course, in the political spheres, that we're hearing from these people. But they're deprived. They're in poor schools. They're in poor parts of the country. The jobs have disappeared. Sometimes these cities, towns, rural communities are plagued by drugs and despair. Well, okay, I won't go on with all the adjectives. They don't have a chance. Now, some of those people think that they need help. They don't know where to turn. And that's evolved into a whole anti-elitist perspective, I think, that's showing up on the political front. Much of what Richard talked about in terms of underrepresented minorities, about elitism, having not allowed in, have not included so many people of color and with different ethnic backgrounds. But that's also, that elitism you're talking about has also excluded a very large number of other Americans, let me just say. So
you're right.
So what would you say to somebody who makes that point and complains about special attention to underrepresented minorities?
Shirley, you want to go first? I mean,
let me go first. I agree with them. They're not well served either. Okay? And that's the reason that we're trying to focus on systemic changes. Because in our experience, if you make it better for women and underrepresented minorities, you end up making it better for everybody. But if you try to make it better for everybody, you often don't end up serving the marginalized, most marginalized groups. I understand why it is the kind of the elitism of the uh, of the sciences and engineering which have presented a problem. I don't think that we get out and that we help people understand the connection to science and engineering to their lives. I don't think that we basically are clear enough with why they need to do this. I don't think that we have reached out. Remember, Neil, we always got into an argument about curiosity driven research, and I'd ask you please not to use that term. That in fact that the public dollars were not being spent to support your curiosity. They were in fact being spent to provide us with foundational knowledge that would allow us to make a difference for the public. And there is a difference in that, and it is one of this little group over here who's benefiting as opposed to the public good. And I really believe that we have to, as you once said, we have to understand the public. It isn't just the public understanding us or understanding the science of mathematics. And I do think that we have a chance here with the disruption that we're going through right now of helping to kind of rejigger and reorient the way we have to think about these issues.
Okay.
Richard?
Neil, I hear this argument every day of my life. Okay. If I get on an airplane and I talk to the person next to me, it's going to come up. Okay. I mean, because usually the person is white. But here's what I say. If you grow up all your life being told you don't belong and you can't do it. Okay. So in California and Los Angeles, I was always told by even teachers and professors, you can't do mathematics because you're Mexican. Okay, Mexicans don't do that. Okay, you come in high school, I was told, you come from a group of people that don't go into those areas. How about being a mechanic or a gardener? Okay, and I says, yeah, I could do that, but I want to be a mathematician. Women, the same thing. Okay, I've seen it. I've been teaching 50 years. I've seen people tell women just either explicitly or implicitly, you can't do it because you're a woman, or they don't see the role models. Okay. Now, I've never seen anybody tell somebody, you can't become a scientist because you're white. Okay. So every time we deal with failure, and I've dealt with plenty of failure, I have to say, were they right? Are they right that I can't do it? Can I succeed? And that was every day of my life. So you don't have to deal with that extra baggage of saying, you can't do it because you're a woman. You can't do it because you're black. You can't do it because you're brown. And I've had that all my life. And I sometimes I do it and I succeed. But I've never heard anybody say, you can't do it because you're white.
So thank you. So Shirley, was there a moment in your scientific career when you said, I think I want to use my knowledge and abilities and my very real and compelling voice to improve equity in science? That's going to be my goal. That's where I'm going to invest my career. Because biology and zoology are fascinating fields, and one can just, and many do, decide to focus on the science. So what was it that you found compelling? Was it sort of a person, your own experience obviously led to that, a job opportunity? I mean, what made the difference for you in your career?
It was by accident. I married. I left a tenure track position. I moved to Washington. I had an opportunity to work at AAAS on a project to try to identify programs that had been undertaken to bring more minorities and women into the sciences. I realized at that point that I had always wondered where everybody went and where everybody was, and that I felt compelled by having been the only in so many places, to try to figure out where where everybody was and how we can essentially make this open. I knew that it wasn't just a matter of people not having the interest. I knew that it wasn't just a matter of people not caring about this. I did know that there were differences and opportunities that were available. I did know that was different messaging that was being sent, just like Richard said, different messaging being sent to Black and brown and indigenous people, different messages being sent to women about what we should aspire to. I had people tell me to my face when I was a pre-med, why do you want to do that? Don't you realize you'd be taking a man's place? You know, how many times has a man ever had somebody said, well, why do you want to do this? Don't you realize you're going to be taking a woman's place? That's the kind of thing, the kind of microaggressions, the kind of things that you experience. And so I decided I want to change this. I want to change this because if science is going to survive, if the nation is going to survive, that this has to change. And that's the road I took.
So, Richard, what about you? You could have devoted your whole life to mathematics, and even though your achievements in mathematics have been quite extraordinary, as has been recognized, perhaps you could have done more if you had not taken the time out to mentor women and underrepresented minorities, and to give 1,000 talks around the world trying to convince people to do more. What would you say?
No, you're right. I could have done more math, but I think that what I've done is more important. Okay, right now I'm writing 2 books. One is about representation. The other one is about math. And if I had to only write one, it would be about representation, not about math. When I was on the National Science Board, Neil, okay, I realized that my life could be a double-edged sword. Okay, I could be role model for minority students like me, and they say, oh, you know, Richard Tapia is a good role. But the other side of the sword is I want to be a role model for majority people. On the National Science Board, you don't know this, but I really thought every time I was in one of the meetings that I want the people on the board to say, Richard Tapia is a good member of this board, so therefore people like him will be good members on this board, and therefore excellence comes in all flavors. Brown and black are great flavors. So that's what I'm trying to do. Right now I'm teaching a class at Rice with 12 students. And I don't have minorities in the class. I have a few Hispanics. But it is a wonderful feeling for me to teach these wonderful Rice students about the sensitivity of underrepresentation. And every day they tell me, wow, I didn't realize that. Wow, I didn't realize this. So I have 2 sides. One is to be a role model, and the other one is to teach the world what truth is really about. That's it.
Let me thank you both for your candor and the way you articulate your decisions. And even Shirley, even if it was an accident, it was certainly a happy accident for the community and science and engineering, mathematics, and I think for you as well, given all you have gotten done. Since the National Science Board has been mentioned and Neil Bing caused trouble, I guess some of our listeners may not know that I was director of NSF during the time Shirley and Richard were on the board. The National Science Board is a statutory body. The members are appointed by the president. In your time, they were confirmed by the Senate. The board has some real authority in policymaking, shared with the director of NSF. The kind of trouble that Richard caused, and Shirley as well, of course, was very welcome trouble. It was an opportunity to make some changes. We were in a period where we had to write the first strategic plan, why we had to make changes to the merit review criteria. I mean, there were many things going on that required your voices, both of you. The people that Richard talked about, he found when he joined the board. Of course, he didn't mean they were bad people in the sense that they were bad people, but some of them lived in a bubble, an elitist.
Oh, yes.
That really that really had zero connection with the issues that we're talking about and with other community. And I think what you and Richard, Shirley, you and Richard managed to accomplish is to support, in fact, the views on the board for change, while at the same time, maybe, I can't be sure, changing the minds and attitudes of some of the people you met when you were there. Seems a long time ago now, but it was a wonderful experience. At least I remember it as that way. I want to thank you both for being with us today. We only have maybe 3 minutes to go. Let me just ask a 30-second final comment from each of you. Shirley, I'll start with you.
Yes, I want to apologize for my technology. I have no idea of why I haven't been able to get my camera back on. I'm just happy I was able to get my mic back on. Let me just say that the experiences that shaped me were very much reflected in the things that I did and said while on the board. And that's one of the advantages I think that you have when you do bring in diverse perspectives. Because quite frankly, more of the same is going to give you the same. Was it Einstein who said, "Don't expect to solve a problem with the same thinking that got you into it"? And I think that in these particular cases, we were able to offer something different. We were able to offer rationale for why we had to reach out beyond our own little bubbles. I know that that was the case. I was so happy when Richard got there, I didn't know what to do because for a while I was there by myself. Thank you, Richard.
I loved it.
Richard, final comment?
Yeah, I'm happy, Neil, even though the representation is not improving. Today's youth are starting to really understand. So I want to compliment today's youth. Okay, I'm teaching them. I teach them at Rice and stuff. And I'm not talking about minority youth. I'm talking about all youth. You seem to get it, even though we're not making progress on representation. I worked with Bill Wolf, who was the president of the National Academy of Engineering for a long time. And I'm going to say something that one time Bill was so disappointed and down because we couldn't make change in National Academy of Engineering. And he looked at me and he said, "Richard, we're making progress one death at a time." Okay. and he was saying the young people get it, but the older people don't. And that doesn't sound like a Bill Wolf comment, but he told me. He says, "We're making progress one death at a time." And so when I look at our students, I'm very happy with it. When I look at our faculty, it depends on ages. Okay. I mean, the older ones don't get it.
Thank you. So I wish we could continue the discussion for several more hours, get more questions from our attendees, but unfortunately we're out of time today. So I want to thank our speakers, Dr. Shirley Malcom and Richard Tapia, for sharing their experience, your experience and insights, as well as all of you in the audience for joining us this afternoon. We miss seeing so many of you in person at the Baker Institute, but we greatly appreciate your continued interest in the Baker Institute programs and the events that we have. When we do open up fully, and as Tony Fauci says, this will end, it really will end, then we hope that you all will visit Rice and the Baker Institute and attend many of our events in person. In the meantime, check the Baker Institute website for additional webinars on a rich array of timely topics. Until then, stay safe, everyone, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Shirley.